in your gaze, right here in your presence, God, is where I want to stay. Oh, just to dwell in your house, waste my hours and my days on you, on you. Lord, we honor you today. We know that this song is a lot more than just us asking what moves your heart, but it's also a cry from you to your beloved, saying, I just want to move you. There's a mutual, self-giving love that happens in this moment of worship, where as we are lifting adoration to you, you are responding with adoration toward us. As uncomfortable as that might be in the current expression of the church, is true. And that's the missing piece that we've missed for so long. We've had the piece of us giving to you, but the piece that we've missed is what you give to us. And a lot of times it's because we don't feel worthy of receiving something of that magnitude, but we are. And so, God, I thank you that as we sing over you, you're singing over us. And we get to experience the back and forth of union in these moments together, because where two or more are gathered, you're absolutely in the midst. And so, God, I pray that we would never take this moment for granted. We would never take this expression for granted, but we would honor it and let this be the fuel that we need to experience it on a day in and day out basis like we were designed for. We love you in your name. Amen. Matt, you can keep playing for a minute while everybody gets situated, but grab your seat. I don't know if there's any more coffee left, but if you want some, you can check and see if there's some left. And then all kids 8 and under, I know we got some new kids here today visiting, so 8 and under, feel free to follow Tim and Hannah and Jordan right out here through the door to the kids space. There's a fireplace in there, so it's perfect. Thanks. Am I on? Check. Yes, I am. Cool. Thanks, Matt. All right. Oh, yeah, I can definitely hear it now. Everybody doing good? Man, Angela, you're here. Wow. Angela and Ryan getting married this afternoon. And y'all showed up to church on your wedding day. That's right. Yep. I love that. Most of the time, people don't show up on their wedding day, the week before their wedding, 12 weeks after their wedding. You know, just milk it for all it's worth. But you guys are doing it. So I'm just playing. Well, actually, no, I'm not. That's usually how it happens. You use me for marrying you, and then you just throw me out like I'm nothing. So no, I'm just kidding. So Luke 19, I'm really excited. I was up until about 12:30 midnight last night finishing this up. So haven't slept. But that's okay. So it's going to be great. I'm really excited about this. Luke 19. I'm going to give you some announcements, and then we'll get into it and keep celebrating. This is one of my favorite days that we've had as a church, because we're doing church. The weather's cool outside. I mean, tonight's going to be kind of cold. But the weather's cool outside, and we get to do a wedding all in one day. Like, this is, I mean, literally as good as it gets. So anyway, I'm glad you guys are here. Let me give you some announcements. Number one, I know I just mentioned this in worship, but obviously I forgot to mention this, so I do want to mention it now. If you didn't come prepared to give physically, obviously I think everybody knows this now, but we have options of giving online. That's great too. So feel free to do that if you haven't for the month so far. DreamColumbia.com/give. On the app you can give, and so you can do that. Thank you so much for your faithfulness in that. Now, all services are back to normal. We don't have to work around pre-scheduled events. Sorry we didn't have church last week. Thank y'all for being flexible over the past couple of months. It's been
2 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off, like that type of thing. But we're back. It's ours now for good, and so we don't have to worry about that anymore. So we'll be all back to normal every week from here on out. Midweek is going to be Tuesday night. We haven't decided a location yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and say Starbucks on Bull Street is where we'll meet Tuesday night. And if that changes, we'll let you know, but just plan on that. I already mentioned Angela and Ryan getting married today, so we want to celebrate them, and that's going to be so awesome. I'm really excited about that. I want to thank, because I don't do this enough, everybody who, and today was a little slim because I know we had a bunch of different moving parts with people helping out with setting up for their wedding tonight and stuff, but all of you that help in the morning and in the afternoon set up and tear down, like, thank you. Evan, Matt, y'all are here every week. Jenna's here every week. Trent, you guys show up, a good bit late, but you're still here. No, I'm just kidding. But you're still here. But Brandon shows up a lot. I mean, like, all of you guys have hands in all of this. And so I just want to thank y'all so much for helping us do that. We don't have a lot. I mean, we got done in like 15 minutes this morning, so it's really easy, but it's still, I'm really thankful for it. That being said, next Sunday and in the future, if you don't help out in anything and you would like to be more involved, we would love to have a few more people help us set up and tear down. It's really easy, and we can get on a rotation to where you don't have to do it every week. So if you would like to do that, specifically next week, we need some help. Please let me or Evan or Matt know after church. Cool. Last thing before we get in, we never have this many announcements, is we'll do this at the end, so somebody please remind me because no doubt I will forget this. But just to say a prayer over Israel. I know that there's like a lot of just unrest going on, craziness going on, and so we're just going to say a prayer over just that whole region at the end for peace. So somebody remind me to do that. But it's been a pretty chaotic weekend if you haven't seen the news over there. So anyway, all that being said, let's jump into Luke 19. So let me read just a little intro, and then we'll read it. Everybody good? Am I missing any announcements or anything else? Praise God. Okay, here we go. So just hang with me for a second. Religion and the way that we've come to know it. Okay, we toss that word around a lot, religion. So let me just give a blanket statement here. When I say religion, or when we kind of throw that word around, it's essentially slang for a system that talks and acts like the real thing, but lacks the real thing. Does that make sense? So if I say religion, or if we throw that word around a lot, we're not talking about necessarily even a set of beliefs. What we're talking about is something that talks the talk, something that looks like it walks the walk, but then when you start to get down into the guts of the thing, there are no guts. Does that make any sense? So the equivalent to this would be like me telling everybody in the room that I was a wide receiver for the Clemson Tigers, right? I could tell you that all day long. I can buy an outfit. I can buy shoulder pads. I can buy a helmet. I can do all that stuff. But at the end of the day, when Saturday rolls around, guess who ain't going on the field to play football? Me. You know what I'm saying? That's religion, okay? It's a lot of talk and a lot of looking like the real thing, and in the guts of it, it's not the real thing. So, if I could give you a definition, and this is going to make sense in just a second, of what religion is. This is the most basic definition that I could give you. It's being unable to see the truth, because it looks different than what you preconceived. At the most basic level, could you shut that door for me right there, Brandon? So the kids can be loud. We don't have to worry about being distracted. At the most basic level, religion is an inability to see truth because it looks different than what you preconceived. Or maybe you could say it like this. It looks different than what the majority thinks, or maybe it looks different than what the prevailing train of thought is, or maybe it looks different than how you grew up, etc., etc., etc. It's being unable to see the truth because there's something blocking your view of the truth. Typically, the thing blocking your view of the truth claims to be the truth. Y'all with me? Well, if you're not, you're going to be with me in a second. This is why Jesus says he is both a cornerstone and a stumbling block. For those who think they know what Jesus is supposed to be like, based on finely crafted preconceived notions, he is a stumbling block, for he rarely is what we thought he would or should be. However, for those who are willing to let Jesus himself define himself on his own terms, without the barrier of what we think those terms or that definition should be, for those, he is the cornerstone that anchors us in our God-given identity. He's both the cornerstone and a stumbling block. The most difficult transition that we will ever make is moving from being highly trained in religion to being fully embraced by love. The most difficult transition that we will ever make, especially if you grew up in any kind of expression of the church, the most difficult transition that we will ever make is transitioning from being highly trained in a religious system to being fully embraced by love. I mean, we've been walking this for 2.5 years. And some days, if we're being honest, it feels like we've hardly moved at all. And that's okay. And we've actually moved a lot. But it takes time and patience to relearn an entire philosophy of how you see God and the world around us. So let me give you another example. I'm learning a lot of Greek right now. And the most difficult thing, how many of you have ever learned a language other than English? Like just any kind of foreign language, right? Okay, most of you. So even if it's like baseline, the first thing you realize when you start learning a different language, especially a language that isn't used anymore. Koine Greek is not used anymore. Greek is, but Koine Greek is not, which is what the Bible was written in the New Testament. And but when you start learning a language, you start to realize it's not so much learning the different words of the different language, or it's not so much learning the different alphabet of the different language. It's learning how words and sentences are structured that are completely different than how the English language structures words and sentences. Okay? So I'm learning this in Greek. In Greek, what would take us 10 words in the English language to communicate, the Koine Greek language can communicate in one word. It's really interesting. So words can take on tons of different letters, additions, breathing marks, accents, etc., and all of them mean different genders, different numbers, different tenses, none of which we have in English, right? So my problem is, trying to learn Koine Greek fluently, my issue is constantly trying to see the Greek language in an English mindset. It always makes me stumble. It's trying to read a sentence in Greek and then pull that sentence apart in a way that makes sense in my English way of thinking, right? Rather than the way to properly learn a language is to shift your thinking to be in this case, Greek way of thinking. Therefore, when you read the sentence in Greek, it makes sense because you're reading it from a perspective of the Greek language, not the English language. Does that make sense, right? So, the reason it's really difficult for us to be fully embraced by the gospel is because we're trying to process the gospel in a religious mindset. Okay? We're trying to take what can only be fully received and fit it in a mindset that says, I can do something to grab hold of it and take it for myself. Right? And so we constantly are the hamster on the wheel, running and running and running and running and running, when we should be the son or the daughter that is simply allowing ourselves to be embraced by the Father that's always been there waiting. So with all of this in mind, okay, all of this set up, I want to speak today on the topic of surrender. And I want to use a story that's very familiar to us to show how both our preconceived ideas completely change the narrative of a story in Scripture, number one. And number two, how when we see it correctly, it will teach us what it was meant to teach us. Luke 19, very familiar. So I'm going to just read it, okay? And as I read it, I want you to try your best to hear it with brand new ears like you've never heard before. This is going to be really difficult because you can't really hear it the way it's supposed to be heard in English. So, but try your best. I'll explain how this breaks apart in just a minute. But you ready for this? I've been so excited for this, so I hope you're ready for it. If I'm the only one excited, that's fine. So here we go. Luke 19, verse 1. He, Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through it on his way to Jerusalem. A man there named Zacchaeus, a man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. When I say tax collector, immediately do you have a positive or negative view of this? Already. Just negative, right? He's a tax collector. Just keep reading. Okay? Verse 3. And he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. Stature in Greek is not height, it's maturity. The Greek word literally is mature. And so he was short in maturity. But I'm not teaching on that today, just letting you know that. So you know the song Zacchaeus was a wee little man. We sing that all the time. He might not have been that small. But anyway, here we go. Welcome to religion. Verse 5. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and let me back up. I missed verse 4. Okay, short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. Just try to hear this new. Listen to this. All who saw it began to grumble and said, He, Jesus, has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Verse 8. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord. Now here's where it's going to get frisky, so just hang with me. This is what he says to the Lord in English. Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Remember that. Verse 9. Then Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. Oh man, I can't wait. But I'm going to keep reading a few more verses, because that's not where the story stops. As they were listening to this, so same situation, same people surrounding him, Zacchaeus' house. As they were listening to this, he went on to tell a parable. Because he was near Jerusalem, and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. Verse 12. So he said, a nobleman went out to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then return. He summoned 10 of his servants and gave them 10 pounds and said to them, do business with these until I come back. But the citizens of his country hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to rule over us. When he returned, having received royal power, he ordered these servants to whom he had given money to be summoned so that he might find out what they had gained by trading. Not stocks, because they'd be getting pummeled right now. 16. The first came forward and said, Lord, your pound has made 10 more pounds. He said to him, well done, good servant, because you have been trustworthy in a very small thing, take charge of 10 cities. Verse 18. Then the second came, saying, Lord, your pound has made 5 pounds. And he said to him, and you rule over 5 cities. Then the other came, saying, Lord, listen, here is your pound. I wrapped it up in a piece of cloth, for I was afraid of you, because you are a harsh man. You take what you did not deposit, and you reap what you did not sow. That sounds very familiar. Sounds a lot like a lot of our views of God. Verse 22. He said to him, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked slave. You knew, did you, that I was a harsh man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow? Why then did you not put my money into the bank? Then when I returned, I could have collected it with interest. He said to the bystanders, take the pound from him and give it to the one who has 10. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 pounds. I tell you, to all those who have, more will be given. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence. Verse 28. After he said this, he went ahead going to Jerusalem. Zacchaeus is the Greek name for the Hebrew name Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is his Hebrew name. Zacchaeus means, you ready? It means innocent and clean. This is really important. Innocent, bless you, and clean. Luke is a brilliant writer. He typically adds a lot to his stories using different techniques that is almost always missed. The first thing you need to realize at the onset of the story of Zacchaeus is that Zacchaeus, according to Luke, from the very beginning, is innocent and clean. Luke gives Zacchaeus this name, whether or not this is his actual name, we can assume it is. But Luke specifically at the start of this story makes clear that this man's name is Zacchaeus in Greek. So before you get into anything about him being a tax collector, anything about him being short, which we've already debunked, anything about Jesus going to his house, Luke is saying the first thing you need to know before you read any of this story is that this man is innocent and this man is clean. Uh-oh. See, already you start to see some things unraveling. It's going to get even better. Okay? At no point in this story is Zacchaeus not clean or innocent. That is his name. That's his identity. And it's interesting because, is this not a conversion story? Is not this entire story of Zacchaeus a conversion story? He starts out a sinner, according to everybody around him. Starts out a sinner. Jesus goes to his house. He makes a statement. Jesus, because you've come to my house, I'm going to go make everything right that I've done wrong. And he's converted, right? Zacchaeus is lost. And then after meeting Jesus, has a moment of conversion where he becomes, I guess we would say, a Christian. There's quite a few problems with this, though. First, Christianity, at this point, does not exist. Does that, see, okay. Even as I'm saying that, I could just feel, what are you talking about? Just to be clear, Christianity wasn't even a thing until the book of Acts. And even in the book of Acts, it wasn't a thing until the people of Antioch say, that group of people that follows Christ, we need to start labeling them something because they're completely different. Let's call them Christians. There it is, Christian. Okay? But just to be clear, Christianity does not exist in Luke 19. Okay? And if that I know that might be weird. You've never heard that before, maybe. If that makes you feel weird, that's okay. It's just true. Okay. So that's problem number one. The Jews were God's people and are God's people. Okay? And Jew, or being Jewish, was not a religion. It was a family, literally. So you weren't Jewish because you kept the law. You kept the law because you were Jewish. Does that make sense? So being a Jew is not a religion. They're not a part of a religion called Jewish, right? Jews are simply the modern name for Israelites, and Israelites were called Israelites. Why? Because they came from Israel, Jacob. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you were Jewish, you were either born Jewish or you became Jewish through another covenant relationship. So the idea of a conversion to a religion is completely foreign to the Gospels. It's not even a thing. The issue in the Gospels is not belief in God, for all the Jews believed in God, including the religious leaders, including the teachers of what? The law of God. Are y'all with me? So the issue is not belief in God. The issue in the Gospels was the belief that Jesus, this man, was God incarnate, that Jesus was the foretold Messiah of God. Does that make sense? Are y'all with me? Okay? So what's at stake here is not whether or not Zacchaeus believes in God, therefore needs to be converted to a religion that believes in God. What's at stake here is Jesus' identity in the eyes of the people. Jesus is not trying to convert anyone to a religion called Christianity. Because remember, Christianity does not exist at this point. Jesus had no desire to create a religion. Jesus came to the Jewish people as God incarnate to do two things. Number one, to fulfill the covenant of Genesis 15, among other covenants between Abraham's kids and God, in which God takes the weight of Israel's running to bring them home out of a spiritual exile. Remember, Genesis 15, just please stick with me. Genesis 15, Abraham falls asleep, he has a dream, there's a blood path that's already been laid, which is a marriage covenant path, and in the dream he wakes up, he sees the fire and the pot walking across, or I guess floating, I don't know what he sees, but going across the path, and in this moment, Abraham never at any point steps in that blood path covenant and yet leaves with a covenant with God. How is that possible? Because God, in the dream, in the vision, tells Abraham, I'm going to enter a covenant with you, but it's not going to be my responsibility versus your responsibility, and if you mess up, you die because of it. I'm going to enter into a covenant with you, but I'm going to take on your side and my side, so if you mess up, I'll be the one responsible for it. Therefore, I will be the one to die in your place. Hello, God incarnate and Jesus dying in our place. Surprise. You know what I mean? Okay? So, number one, the incarnation was God fulfilling that covenant. It was God keeping his word to Abraham. And number two, it was to fulfill the call of Sinai in Exodus 19, in which Israel was called to be a kingdom of priests to the entire world, which God declares is his. And what is a priest? A priest is a mediator between God and man. A mediator, somebody who stands in between, somebody who connects the two parties. Okay? So if you go back to Exodus 19, at Sinai, the original call of Israel was to be a kingdom of priests, and God literally says, he says, the entire earth is mine, but you are to be for me a kingdom of priests. For what? To declare to the world, to mediate to the world, they are mine. So he does two things in the incarnation. And it makes sense in Zacchaeus in a second. He comes to fulfill that covenant with Israel, and then he comes to do what Israel had not done up to that point, which was to mediate to the world, Gentiles, you are mine. You are my people as much as my people are my people. Okay? So there's the Bible in 5 minutes. So Jesus is not trying to convert somebody to a new religion. Jesus is trying to wake people up to what is right before them. Religion kept most from seeing it. However, just because they didn't see it did not make it any less true. Jesus, therefore, being the Messiah, was a reality whether or not they chose to accept it. By rejecting it, they weren't creating a new reality in which Jesus was not the Messiah, and they are right. By rejecting Jesus being the Messiah, they're simply going against what is true, that Jesus is actually the Messiah. They are spending themselves fighting what they cannot defeat. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is God incarnate. So get on board or follow, or don't get on board and make things a lot harder for yourselves. But at the end of the day, he's the Messiah. Okay? I mean, think of it like this. All of you are in Dream Church today, right? You could tell yourself all day long, you could tell people all day long that you didn't go to church today, that you didn't come to this building, that you didn't show up to Main Street, and that Dream Church does not exist. And you could tell people, you could believe that, you could go home thinking that that is exactly what is true, but at the end of the day, it's a lie. Because it does exist and you were here. Right? So what's at stake in you believing whether or not Dream Church exists or does not exist is not the existence of Dream Church. What's at stake is you either being in alignment with what is just simply true, or you being in alignment with what is absolutely delusional. Do you know what I'm saying? So, can I take it a little further? Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost. So here's a few issues. Did Jesus do what he said he was going to do? I believe he did. You don't have to believe that. I believe he did. So here's the issue. You could either believe that Jesus did what he said he was going to do and be in alignment with truth. Or you could believe that Jesus only did partially what he said he was going to do and be in alignment with a delusion. But at the end of the day, he came to seek and save the lost, and he did. Amen, brother. Okay. Now that that's all straight, let me point out another problem with this story. And when I say problem, I say it loosely because it's actually a good thing. Everybody good? Am I ruining everybody's theology right now? Hopefully. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I heard that. So let me point out another problem with this. Luke says purposely on the onset that this man's name is Zacchaeus. I just mentioned this. In other words, from the start, Luke lets us in on a spoiler that Zacchaeus is in the right in the forthcoming story. He is clean. He is innocent. Okay? And Luke goes even further by telling us in verse 7 that all the people were grumbling because Jesus has, and I quote, gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. So, the people say this man is a sinner. But Luke tells us that this man is clean and innocent. The question is, which is it? I mean, if he's a tax collector, how could he possibly be clean? Well, the Greek comes to our rescue here to help us out. In verse 8 tells us that after Jesus goes to his house and after the town calls him a sinner, that Zacchaeus stood and said this. Now, let me read what my Bible says. I don't know what yours says. Let me read what mine says. This is what he says. Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Okay? Now in English, what does this tell us? It tells us that Zacchaeus promises to do something that he has not done up until now. Right? I will do blank. I will pay back blank. That's all future tense, right? Good? Future tense. I will do this at some point later. And if this tense is correct, it would indicate that something has happened in this meeting with Jesus that caused Zacchaeus to have a change of heart and convert to Team Jesus, or Christianity, or whatever you want to call it, which would make the village right in calling him a sinner, and would mean that he didn't step into the fullness of who he was, which is his name meaning, clean and innocent, until his supposed conversion in this meeting with Jesus. Okay? If he will give to the poor and he will pay back those he's defrauded, that means something happened at this point that changed a future tense something else. But Greek has a way of speaking that sometimes we don't have in English, and this is prime example, and this was written in Greek. So we need to look at the Greek to see what this is really saying. And in the Greek text of this passage, this verse is in the present tense and would read something like this. You ready? I'm about to change the whole story. This is the original language. Here we go. You ready? He stands up and he says, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord," in the Greek, "I am giving to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone anything, I am paying back 4 times as much." Are you thinking? Listen to the difference. Number 1, half my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone anything, I will pay them back 4 times as much. Original language. Half my possessions, I'm already giving to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone anything, I'm already paying back 4 times as much. When read this way, suddenly there's a whole new realization. This is something Zacchaeus has already been doing, which means it is an ongoing action, which means the village was actually wrong, and Zacchaeus was actually always clean and innocent as seen by his actions, which means he's actually always been who he really is. And if this is the case, why did Jesus visit his house? The story of Zacchaeus is not a story of Zacchaeus' conversion. It's the story of the delusion of the people in the city around him. I promise surrender's coming. The climax, the point, the aim of this story is not what Zacchaeus has to say. The aim of the story is what is said about Zacchaeus before Zacchaeus says anything. He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Jesus goes to the house and he says, "Jesus, I give to the poor. When somebody's defrauded me, I don't just pay him back. I pay him back 4 times as much to make up for it." What was some of the accusations that Jesus threw against the religious leaders? Typically, it revolved in some way, shape, or form around the fact that they do not take care of who? The poor. This man, he's attacked. This man's a sinner. Jesus is going to be with him? Or could it be that Jesus finds someone in the crowd of all the people who were about to scream out, "Kill him," and finds a man in the crowd who has already rooted himself in what the gospel would become on the other side of the resurrection. And in doing that, it becomes a sign to those on the outside saying, the sinner is not the one who you think it is. The sinner is the one who thinks they've got everything under control because they're living in this law-abiding, works-based reality, when in truth, it's the one who has done something with what was given to him that is the one that I will make a ruler over, for example, 10 cities. But the ones who have taken what was given to them, a la the law, and has hid it because they're afraid of the master, because they're afraid that he takes what does it say right here? It says, you take what you did not deposit and you reap what you did not sow. When they take what was given to them and they hide it out of fear of a God who is angry, who rips things that are not his, who takes things that he did not sow, and then when Jesus comes into the picture as fully God, and they respond as, this can't be the Messiah because this is what Isaiah said. That doesn't match it. This is what Moses says. And he's doing stuff that Moses said we should not do. He's certainly not doing it like Moses said we should do it. I mean, remember Jesus at the Sermon on the Mount saying things like this. Moses said this, but I'm telling you this. You know what I'm saying? They're taking what was given to them and having buried it, they're now returning the very thing that was given to them because they've done absolutely nothing. When Zacchaeus, though he is a tax collector, though he is in a position that is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum as the religious teachers of the law, Zacchaeus has been taken what has been given to him, even in bad circumstances and in a bad situation and in a job that everybody hates him in, and has planted it and allowed it to bear fruit in that place. This story happens as the last stop in the book of Luke before Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where he will ultimately die. This is almost like his last statement before the salvation of the world. The real story that Zacchaeus becomes an analogy for is what follows about the servants and the money that he gave them to watch over. I just read it. There's one servant that was given 1 pound, which is about 3 months' wages, and he turned it into 10. And in return, he was made ruler of 10 cities, right? Another servant was given, it must be really cold in here because my nose is just running. Are y'all freezing? Okay, yeah. I don't know who to tell. Jordan, maybe you could bump that up to like 72 or something. And I think the heat will turn on, or the air will turn back on. I don't know. We'll see. Another servant was given 1 pound, and he turned it into 5, he or she. And in return, they were made ruler of 5 cities. But finally, as we just mentioned, there was another servant given 1 pound and simply returned it to him because he was afraid. He had a view of the master that caused him to fear, caused him to fear the possibility of failure. Therefore, instead of living out what he had been given and allowing that to produce more fruit, he hid what he had been given, protecting it at all cost, afraid to mess up, afraid to miss something, and simply return what he had been given when the master returned. Remember, Jesus is speaking this on his way to Jerusalem. You could make this, about the second coming of Jesus. You know, what have you done with what you were given when the master returns? You could do that. You can make it about the second coming of Jesus. Or you could, possibly a little more accurately, make this about the moment when Jesus enters Jerusalem as king. Which is interesting because that is the very place where in the book of Ezekiel, the presence of God left the temple. So by definition, at the birth of Jesus, when Mary and Joseph take Jesus to Jerusalem, in that moment, the presence of God, for the first time since this account in Ezekiel, returns to Jerusalem. But in what is about to take place, Jesus is going to have this triumphant entry into Jerusalem as king, which would be a returning to the place where the presence of God left in Ezekiel because of Israel's turning away. So I want you to try to do this. Take this parable, and and it could absolutely work like this too. So instead of placing it in a future tense, like something that's going to take place, take this parable and place it in this moment. The master is about to return to see what his servants did with what they were given. The presence is returning to tear the veil, and the last thing Jesus speaks before this entry, according to Luke, is about a servant who did nothing with what they had been given. And then a few verses later, we see that Jesus does what over Jerusalem? Weeps. If you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you, surround you, and hem you in on every side. They'll crush you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another. Listen, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. And then, check this out. You ready? You ready? Okay? And then, immediately after this, the presence of God returns to the temple. Just please hang with me. I can see your eyes. Okay? Ezekiel, the presence of God on the wheels, is lifted up and leaves the temple. Here in Luke, he gives this parable, meets Zacchaeus, weeps over Jerusalem, and then the presence of God, for the first time since this encounter in Ezekiel, enters the temple. And when he enters the temple, what does he do? Anybody remember? Cleanses it. I mean, from Zacchaeus all the way to the end of the parable of the 10 pounds, Jesus is screaming out that it is not the religious ones who simply guard what they've been given, their tradition, their ways of thinking, their ways of seeing Scripture, etc., out of fear that they'll mess up or that they'll be punished or that they'll be judged, because fear has created a false god within that are the faithful ones. It's not those. It's the ones who take what they have been given by the Master, in our case, the gospel of union and perfect love, that drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment, which is no more, and invest it in all areas of their lives until it bears 10 plus times what was invested originally. This is literally what surrender is. It's not compartments of you that can be surrendered to Jesus. You cannot surrender portions of you. Surrender is all or absolutely none. If you're 99% surrender to the Lord, you are 0% surrender to the Lord. It's an all or nothing. James even tells us that the double-minded person is unstable in every way. All of you has to be surrendered to the gospel, or none of you is. Your time, your money, your priorities, your family, your friends, your careers, your relationships, etc., 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 all have to be surrendered to the gospel of perfect love, and allow that to be planted and bear fruit in all of those areas of your lives, and it will. These are the ones who Christ calls to rule in the earth. The ones who are willing to let the seed do its work, no matter what the seed looks like, or the work looks like, or the fruit looks like. Not the one who hides what they've been given so that they don't lose it, but the ones who sow it, knowing that they could not possibly lose it. So are you fully surrendered to the gospel? What in you still needs to be surrendered to the gospel? Zacchaeus was a faithful tax collector. You didn't even know that existed. Right? I mean, imagine that. Zacchaeus was a faithful tax collector. How many times have we used this passage to say, hey, Zacchaeus was an awful dude until Jesus came, with no proof, you know? But Zacchaeus was a sinner because that's what all the people said. And man, if I was what everybody said about me, it wouldn't be good. I don't know about y'all. Maybe you guys are like clean and people love you and say amazing things about you. As for me and my house, you know, you guys say great things about us to our face. No, I'm just kidding. But, right, we've taken this story and made it about a lot of things. Number one, that Zacchaeus was short, which takes all the short people and just kind of makes them like not good, you know? I mean, it's okay to be short. But Zacchaeus was short, so he had to climb a tree to see Jesus. No, he had to climb a tree to see Jesus because there were thousands of people cramming in around Jesus. Y'all do the same thing when Taylor Swift comes to town, right? If Taylor Swift's walking down the street, you're not going to stand in the crowd, you're going to climb a building. Just be real, okay? So he's in a tree. We've tried to make this story. Sometimes we've tried to make this story about it being bad to be rich. I could feel it, you know? It's not a bad thing to be rich. In fact, we need rich people in the kingdom or else we're not going to do a lot. I'll just be honest with you. Well, brother, I don't know about that. Jesus' ministry was funded by a handful of extremely wealthy women. How do you think Jesus and all these disciples are walking around doing ministry, having food to eat? How do you think that's taking place? You think they're walking in and stealing people's vines? You know? Like, we're going to walk in here and steal all these people's... How can you do that? I'm God. You know? Like, what do we think? Well, you know the Son of Man didn't have a place to lay his head, and yet he slept. That doesn't mean what you think it does either. But, you know what? No, the ministry of Jesus was funded by a handful, one in particular, of very wealthy women. The ministry of Paul was funded by an extremely, primarily wealthy woman. So we've tried to take this and say that it's really, really bad to be rich. It's not. It's bad to let money rule over you. But if you rule over money, it should be producing fruit. If you're ruling over money, it should be gaining. Do you know what I'm saying? So the whole thing about, in order to follow Jesus, you got to be, poor. If that's your thing, roll. That's not my thing. I personally don't think that's my thing. That's not my calling. If that's yours, it's great. But you know what I'm saying? But these are the ways that we've used the Zacchaeus story, and 9 times out of 10, the reason that religion builds up these walls around these parables is because the guts of what the parable is saying is actually speaking to us. What are we doing with what we have been given? Zacchaeus was planting what he had been given in the most despised of places, and it bore fruit. Zacchaeus was a wealthy man with authority in that town. Why? Not because he was a cheat like the other tax collectors, but because he was faithful and had integrity, and God rewarded him for it. I need you to hear this, okay? Zacchaeus was not a wealthy man with everything that he had because he was a cheat like some of the other tax collectors. He didn't go to somebody's house and say, Rome tells you you owe 10 cents, I'm telling you you owe $10, and him keeping everything but the 10 cents that Rome takes. That's what a lot of the tax collectors did, which is why the Jewish people and everybody else hated him, okay? But Zacchaeus was going to the houses, telling them, this is exactly how much you owe, and if I've done anything against you, I'll return it myself back to you 4 times over. And to the poor, if you can't afford the taxes, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it for you. Just don't tell anybody. Zacchaeus was taking what had been given to him and planted it in that place, and it bore fruit, not because he was a cheat, but because he was faithful, and God rewarded him for his faithfulness. The presence of God rested in the home of Zacchaeus before it made its way to Jerusalem and even back to the temple. He was fully surrendered. He was willing to do whatever it took to climb this tree to see the man that I believe with all my heart, with full integrity, I believe Zacchaeus was completely convinced that that was the Son of God. Or else, why are you climbing a tree to see him? Zacchaeus didn't need healing. Zacchaeus didn't need anything from Jesus. The people that were crowding around Jesus were the ones that were sick, the ones that needed a touch, the ones that needed a healing, the ones that had spent all their money on resources because they had bleeding for 12 years, etc., etc., etc. But Zacchaeus needed nothing from Jesus. Why is Zacchaeus climbing this tree, working his way to the bone to see this man that's coming into town, unless he is fully convinced that this man is who he says he is, and he has to get a glimpse of the eyes of the one that he is fully convinced he is one with? Fully surrendered. And my question is this you? Is this me? Is this us? Are we the ones in such a place where we're taking what the Lord has given us? I'll just say the gospel, but you can fill in the blanks with all the specifics around that. Taking what the Lord has given us. It might be resource, it might be time, it might be talent, it might be whatever. Are we the ones taking that and sowing it faithfully in a place where it's starting to bear fruit? Surrender. Or are we the ones who live our lives in fear of a God who at any moment of our lives could snatch whatever little bit of good we have away from us, and I'm worth that because I'm just a sinner anyway, and that's just how the world works. And because of that, we're the ones that are storing away what we've been given just in case there's a day that comes when we need a backup plan for the faithfulness of God when it fails. I mean, that's what it is absolutely all or nothing. And there's people in the room. There's people in the room that you've made life choices around being surrendered to the Lord. And I want to tell this to you because I don't do this a lot. But those of you who have done that and you haven't seen a lot of fruit from it yet, I'm telling you, the promise of God is that you will bear fruit for your surrender. And I want to speak as a pastor, as a spiritual father, etc. The Lord is bringing fruit in all the places of our lives that we have surrendered to Him over the years in simple trust and in simple amazement at the fact that we want to be as close to His eyes as we can possibly be. Whatever that cost, whatever that means, whatever we have to lay down, whatever we have to pick up for that, I want to be fully surrendered to the ways of the Lord. Where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. Moses, if you do not go with us, then we don't even want to go. I don't care about the land. I don't care about the promised land. If you don't go with us, I don't want the promised land. Those of you that have made these decisions to say, I want to be where you are. I want to be where you're moving. I want to be where I'm being deeply rooted in a place where I can realize the fullness of who I am because you're moving. Those of you that have made those decisions, and those of you that haven't, but you're maybe in your life are going to have to make those decisions in the future. The Lord is going to bring fruit in its season that is going to make the surrender worth it. let me just be honest with you as a pastor. I have to speak that to myself all the time. You can ask Jordan. All the time, there are moments when I go to the Lord and I go to Jordan, who sometimes is the mediator for me, and a lot of times. And I go to, and I'm like, wait, y'all know the story. I've told you. I know. Like we've done this, we've given up this. I mean, the whole just sob story, you know what I mean? Like, blah, 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 blah. And like, Lord, and we're still, like, I'm still worried about this, and we're still stressing about this, and blah, 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 right? And I constantly am brought back to the place where David says, I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging for bread. And it's those things that come back up that constantly remind me that the surrender is worth it. But at the end of the day, our surrender is not for what we're going to get on the other end of it. Do you see what I'm saying? You will, absolutely. Like that's why we say at the tithe all the time. If you give, it will be given to you, no doubt. At 100%, I've seen that in my life a billion times, okay? So absolutely, the Lord will honor your giving. But at the end of the day, you don't give because of what's coming on the other end. You give because you love. You know what I mean? And in the same way, I don't surrender my life because I know prosperity in whatever that looks like is coming on the other end. I lay down my life in the same way. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We believe the Lord will save us in this fiery furnace, but even if he does not, we still aren't going to bow down to you. You know what I mean? It's in this place of you are so in love with the one who has captured your heart and embraced it and refused to let it go that you revert all of your ways around the one way that is aimed at your heart, and you refuse to move to the right or to the left of that. It might look different. It might mean your plans change. It might mean your relationships change. Hello? Right? It might mean that what you thought was going to be your life is absolutely not what your life ends up like. But at the end of the day, it is 100% worth it if we get him. Surrender. Surrender. So, some of you that are in these jobs that feel like you're tax collectors, that nobody likes, that you don't even like, here's an example. You can plant the gospel exactly where you are and become a seed of what it means to rule in the earth. It just takes surrender. So, Matt, come up here. We're going to do something. And could y'all go ahead and get that ready up on the counter? We're going to do communion. And I just felt like, it had been a while. We actually were going to do it a couple weeks ago, and our communion things expired. I didn't want to give you expired communion stuff. So, because then you would leave not full of life, you'd leave it full of something else. But we have stuff that is not expired. And but here's what we're going to do for real. Is we're going to take communion before we wrap it up. As we take communion, I want you to have this moment. So we're going to do a little different. I'll give you an example. Matt, you can go ahead. So you're just going to walk over here, and I know it's going to be chaotic, so I know that. But walk over here. All you're going to do is you're going to take a piece of bread. It's Hawaiian bread, so it's going to taste good. How many of you have had communion that actually tastes good, right? So you're going to take bread, and all you're going to do is just dip it in, okay? And take it. Blood in the body. Okay? Tastes like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. Man, I might double dip on communion today. But this is why. This is why I want to do communion specifically today. Is because it's one thing to talk about being surrendered to the Lord. It's a whole other thing to surrender your life to the Lord when you realize he's surrendered everything to us. And that's what communion literally represents. It's the body and the blood. It's, this is my body which is broken for you. Take it in remembrance of me. This is the blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Take it as you remember me. It is a remembrance that as we take this, that we are one with the body, which means we're one with him in covenant. And as we take the blood, we are one in the forgiveness that he paid for us to have. It's a memory. It's remembering that not only are we one with him, that our sins have been completely blotted out. And it literally, as you take communion, it becomes a part of you. You are what you eat. So as you take communion, it literally gets into your body and becomes a part of who you are. That's why communion is so amazing. So as orderly as we can, and Matt will just play for a minute. I know it's going to take a second. It's okay. Just walk over, take a piece of bread, dip it, bring it back. Whenever you feel led, take it, and then we'll pray at the end. So y'all go ahead. Whoever wants to be the first one. Brandon, I can always count on you. So everybody make your way over. Thank you, Brandon. And do that, and then we'll wrap up in a second. Y'all are good. That was so orderly. But I want to pray over this. So y'all bow your heads and pray with me. Lord, I pray that this moment of communion would be so much more than a memory. Like, do this in remembrance of me. But that remembrance is an active thing. And we're not just remembering the event of the cross. We are. But in taking communion, we're literally becoming the events of the cross. We're consuming it, literally. So God, I pray that we would be so convinced of that which we have consumed. Communion is proof of the gospel for us. Communion is proof of the perfect love that has been imputed to us. So God, I thank you that we are those who, even at our worst, you saw fit. You saw so much in us that you decided to become that which was running and turn us around and bring us home. And so, God, I pray that this would stick with us today, even as we get a picture of what this looks like physically tonight. I mean, it's amazing. In a marriage where two become one, and they don't become one because they've done anything to earn that. They become one because they're simply in love with each other, and that's it. So that's covenant. I chose you, you chose me. That's it. So God, I believe today is really a day where we get to see what surrender to the oneness of what we've been invited into looks like in many different ways. So I thank you for that. I pray as we're praying right now over the Middle East and Israel, I pray that you would bring peace in that region. I pray that the fighting would cease. I pray that you would repay anything that has been done in the wrong. I pray that you would bring such a mindset over the Middle East. I mean, that's all we ever hear about is conflict and conflict and conflict and conflict and conflict and conflict in the Middle East. And I pray that would be the place where peace would begin to bloom for the earth. I pray that you would cover families that are in fear living in that area. Maybe families that were near the sites where some of this stuff happened. Kids that were near there that can't sleep at night because they're afraid it's going to happen again. I pray that you would just cover them with a peace that is so deep that it cannot be understood. And God, we honor you for the days ahead and what you're going to build from this, how you're going to bring beauty from all of these ashes. God, I pray also ahead of time for Angela and Ryan. I mean, we get the honor of seeing this later on today. I pray that you would cover the rest of the day. All the plans would go well. No keys would get locked in any cars. That happened this morning, so I was just... And no, but seriously, I pray that everything would go smooth. There wouldn't be any stress. The weather would continue to be absolutely amazing. And God, we honor you as a family that two of our own are becoming one. And so, God, I can't wait to celebrate that. We love you and honor you in this place. In your name, amen. Amen. All right. See y'all either tonight or Tuesday, whenever we see you next. And, last thing. If you would like a t-shirt, they're right back here. They obviously look just like this. They have Dream Church on the back, if you didn't see it. And they're $30, which is literally just us breaking even. So we're not profiting anything off of these because we don't order thousands at a time like the big guys do. They cost a little more for us. So we're just aiming at breaking even. So $30. If you want a t-shirt, they're back here. We prefer cash or cards, checks, but if you have a card, we have a card reader. We can do that too. So however you want to do that, just see me over here and you can get one. All right. Have a good week. We'll see y'all later.